everybody, my name is Mr. Francy and welcome back to Mr. Francy Reads. Okay, so today I am doing my reading vlog covering all the books that I read between the 30th of April and the 6th of May 2023. I apologize for the delay of this one. I have a special project in the works that you may or may not have seen at this stage, and it has kind of put me a little bit behind with my videos, but we are catching up now. Alright, so I have read 3 books during this period, and I'm very excited to discuss all of them with you. So the first book that I read this week was this book, The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. This is book number 3 in timeline order for the Chronicles of Narnia. It is a middle grade classic series, and I gave this book 4 stars. So the premise of this book is that we follow Shasta, who is an adopted son of a very mean fisherman. One night Shasta overhears his adoptive father and another man discuss the sale of Shasta, so Shasta decides to run away. Before he does, he comes upon a horse of that man that would purchase him, and comes to find out that the horse can talk. The horse's name is Bree, and Bree tells Shasta he was from Narnia, and that's why he can talk. At once, both feel that they can benefit from each other's company, and so they travel on a quest to get to Narnia. But their travel won't be easy, and how will they manage the obstacles they face? Only time will tell. So to my thoughts on this book, and I must admit I was a little let down by the lack of characters we're all used to. This book connects to the world of Narnia more than the story we've been following from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but not with the characters that we've grown to love, such as like Susan and everyone else. The characters are lost on me just for the moment. But yeah, the characters that we were used to from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe do not heavily feature in this book. There's a little section that we get of them, but the majority of the time we follow Shasta and Bree. So that was a little bit of a letdown, but not too much. I only took off a star for it. But I have to say that in saying that, I loved the interactions between the horse and his boy, and the ending was a lot of fun too. I have really been enjoying my read of this series so far. Every book is a novella, so they're short, quick reads, and so if you're someone who's interested in picking up the series, I do highly recommend it. C.S. Lewis has done a great job with the series so far, so that's why I recommend it, but also because they're really short. So I generally read each of my Chronicles of Narnia books at the end of the month, and it's a great, nice, quick, light read way to finish off the month. So I end up giving this book 4 stars, and I'm looking forward to moving on to book number 4. Well, that was very quick, but I didn't really have a lot to say about The Horse and His Boy. As I said, it was an enjoyable read. So let's move on to the next book that I read. And the next book that I read was this book, which is Ruthless Fae by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. This is book number 2 in the Zodiac Academy series, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. Now, before I go into my mini review for this book, I just want to comment on what I was saying with my SAS list update, my most recent video, or second most recent, anyway, the SAS list update video, where I'm not continuing on with this series this year. It does not mean that I am DNFing this series. I can't. This is a series that has been, oh my gosh, pulling me in from book 1A, which is from the perspective of the boys, I think. That's what it's called. As told by the boys, but yeah, literally is a book from the perspective of the boys, has been pulling me in since then. And book number 2 also pulled me in as well. It's a very enticing series, but I've decided to try and actively cut down on the fantasy books that I read for the rest of the year, because I want to give other genres a bigger chance for me to read more from them. And so therefore, this is the last book I'm reading from Zodiac Academy for this year, but it's not a DNF, it's just a shelve. I know that this series will be on my SAS list for next year, and if it's not next year, then it might be later on this year that I just end up wanting to read book 3 anyway. I mean, I'm just so intrigued by the series. But yeah, anyway, that explains that. Now let's talk about this particular book. So the premise of this book is that in this one, Darcy and Tori continue to learn and grow in Solaria, not only learning more about their abilities, but also how to handle and sometimes even take revenge on their bullies. But the question of they're claiming the throne, while never before being a consideration, is now one to consider. Will they be happy to simply graduate Zodiac Academy, or do they actually want to claim their thrones as well? So to my thoughts on this one, I have few minor complaints, but on the whole, this book was just as seductively enticing as books 1 and 1.5. To my complaints first, after really enjoying As Told by the Boys, I was disheartened to see how little we got of the boys' perspectives. It definitely felt more like 80% As Told by the girls and 20% As Told by the boys, and honestly, I would have preferred a whole lot more. And just to interject and elaborate a little more on that. I honestly would have preferred if it was the other way around. 80% as told by the boys and 20% as told by the girls. I do get it. Darcy and Tori are the main characters. They're the ones we're following. That was the correct choice made by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti, because Tori and Darcy grew up believing they were human. They have no idea about this world. So just as with other amazing fantasy books that I've read that include a school, such as Harry Potter or the Nevermore series, it is better to have protagonists who know nothing about the world so that they can meet the world for the first time and we can see them meeting this world for the first time through their eyes. So that does make sense. It's just for me personally as a reader, I personally preferred the boys' perspectives to the girls. I loved As Told by the Boys. So for me, it was just a little bit of a letdown. I didn't want to take off too much of a star rating for this, but it's something that I needed to mention because I'm hoping we get more of the boys' perspectives in the next book than we did of this one. And another complaint that I had, again just a minor one, was that the beginning wasn't as enticing as I would have liked. I think that was also because it ties into my other complaint, which was that we had a whole ton of Tori and Darcy chapters before we had a boy's perspective. I will say though, we open up with one of the boys' perspectives in chapter 1, which is Caleb, and so I did appreciate that, but yeah, the beginning was just a bit slow for me, and I'm not a slow reader. I prefer for my books to be fast-paced. But yeah, so those were my two complaints. But again, they were also really minor. Once things got going, I held on for the wild ride I've come to expect of the series so far, and I was not disappointed. It was great seeing Darcy and Tori grow into their powers and get used to the academy, as well as Fae culture. I still love all the boys despite their wanting to keep the throne in their families and all that that encompasses. I truly loved getting to know Max, which is the Siren heir, a lot more in this one especially, and I loved how Tori and Darcy lowered their walls a lot more in this one, especially around Orion and Seth. So all in all, I gave this book 4.5 stars, and once again just want to reiterate that while I am shelving the series, it is purely because I'm trying to curb as many of my fantasy books as I can, which is not going to be easy for me because I love my fantasy, but that is purely to give other genres more of a chance for me to get more exposure into those other genres. But I do love the series as a whole, so my shelving has nothing to do with how much I love the series. And at the latest, because it may be earlier than this, but at the latest, I will be diving right back into this series in 2024 because it's been a great read for me so far. 4.5 stars from me. Actually, before I move on to the final book that I read this week, I just want to make a couple of notes here for anyone who's potentially thinking of picking up this series. So I've made no qualms. I do love the series, despite the fact that I'm shelving it and picking it back up again in 2024. I think it's amazing. But there have been some things that have been brought to my attention that I want to warn anyone about before you do pick up this series. The first thing I want to warn you of is that Book 1 and Book 1.5, so we have The Awakening and As Told by the Boys, which were written to be read in tandem. What that means is that you pick up Book 1 at the same time as you pick up Book 1.5. There is a reading order to go between both. So you may read, for example, chapters 1 and 2 in The Awakening, and then chapter 1 in As Told by the Boys, then chapter 3 of The Awakening and chapter 2 of As Told by the Boys, and you read them in tandem going back and forth. My warning going into it is it is a fantasy series, but there are some things to take note of. For example, there are some triggers in both of those books. There is a lot of bullying that occurs at the Zodiac Academy. There is a good enough reason for the bullying that it keeps me going with the series. Needless bullying, I don't understand. But for the sake of this series, what you need to know is that Tori and Darcy, if they graduate Zodiac Academy, they will have a rightful claim to the throne of Solaris, the world that they're in, whereas the boys parents are currently on the throne, and they are to inherit that title once they graduate. But if the girls graduate, they won't be able to. So the boys have been tasked not only because they want to themselves, but also from pressure from their parents to do everything they can to ensure the girls don't graduate so that no one in their family loses their throne. So bullying does occur, but there is an actual reason behind it that makes sense. I am not in any way at all advocating bullying, especially out in the real world. This is a fictional world. I'm just saying that, to me, I don't appreciate bullying a lot in books, but when there is a reason that I understand why it's occurring, then I don't mind it in fiction. I just wanted to let you know. Another thing that I do need to let you know is if you are a great lover of fantasy, as I am, especially when it comes to magic systems, I'm a huge fan of Brandon Sanderson, and he has some amazing high fantasy hard magic system works. This magic system in this series so far is the softest I've ever come across. What I mean by that is we really don't know a lot about the magic at all. It is elemental magic where the girls basically think of what they want to do and voila, it happens. That is not something I'm used to. If you're not a fan of soft magic systems, you need to know that going in. Go into this series for the sake of its world building. I'm loving learning more and more about Solaris and the Zodiac Academy in general. So just some tips and tricks for you if you are intending on picking up these books. There are some complaints that have been made about them, especially with the bullying side and the magic system side. But if that is something that you can deal with, then I do highly recommend it. It is, oh my gosh, it is such a temptation type series where it's one of these books where I was talking with a dear friend of mine, Michelle, over on Cozy Reading with Michelle, and we were both saying how there are certain things that come up in this book that we really don't like, but the series just finds a way to keep drawing us in. So yeah, that's what I would say, is that there are things that go on that, you know, you may not necessarily love, or you may, but if you don't, it's one of those series that is just so enticing, it's really hard to put down. All right, that's enough about Zodiac Academy. Let's move on to the final book that I've read so far this week. So the final book I read this week was this book, which is The Lost Book of the White by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. This is a YA fantasy book, and I gave this book 4 stars. It is book number 2 in the Eldest Curses duology. Because I've now finished it, I have now scrapped this series off of my SAS list because it is now complete. Okay, so in this series, we follow Alec Lightwood and Magnus Bane, who are a couple from the Mortal Instruments series that Cassandra Clare wrote. And so in that particular series, they are side characters, but in this duology, they are placed front and center as the main characters. Not only were Magnus and Alec my number 1 ship in the Mortal Instruments series, but Alec Lightwood is not only my favorite character from this world, but possibly one of my all-time favorite, like top tier fictional characters. So for me, I felt very blessed that Cassandra Clare had written this duology, and apparently she plans to release book number 3 at some stage. She's just taking a break at the moment. If she does, I'll definitely read it. But for now, this book read as a conclusion to the duology, and I'm treating it as such. Once again, I gave this particular book, the final book in the duology, 4 stars. So the premise of this one is that Magnus and Alec have a child. Yeah, so that is a big bomb that I am dropping, and it was certainly a big one for me because I went into this book as being book 2 in this duology after reading book 1 last month, and Magnus and Alec did not have a child at the end of book 1, and then suddenly here I am thrown into book 2. Magnus and Alec have a child, and all I can think is, what the heck? How did they have a kid? And then I realized maybe I'm reading this out of timeline order. Now, I'm a series purist. What does that mean? It means that if there are many series within a particular universe, such as this one, that I will read each series loyally, rather than reading book 1 from this series, book 1 from this series, then going to book 2 from the first series I was reading, then book 1 from series 3, and so on and so forth. If I start a series, I need to read 1, 2, 3, and however many there are before moving on to the next one. And it seems in timeline order, this book is not recommended to be read directly after reading book 1 in this duology. So there are a couple of different suggestions for how to read each book in this Shadowhunters universe, but there is a great number of suggestions on rivetedlit.com. That is rivetedlit.com. And the first reading order suggestion they have is Cassandra Clare's own suggestions. So Cassandra Clare recommends you start off reading The Mortal Instruments Part 1, which is the first 3 books, City of Bones, City of Ashes, City of Glass, then reading book 1 in this duology, The Eldest Curses, which is the Red Scrolls of Magic, then going on to read Infernal Devices, Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, Clockwork Princess, then The Mortal Instruments Part 2, City of Fallen Angels, City of Lost Souls, City of Heavenly Fire, and then you have 2 other books, The Bane Chronicles and Tales from the Shadowhunters Academy, before reading this book, The Lost Book of the White. That makes sense because Alec and Magnus's child apparently are introduced in one of the novellas from Tales from the Shadowhunters Academy. I did this research when I was reading this book because I thought, what the heck? How in the world did Alec and Magnus end up with a kid? And then found that out. So if you are thinking of doing a Shadowhunters universe read-through of all those series, then I would recommend doing it that way, or at least track, if you read the Red Scrolls of Magic, then track down the novella in Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy where the child is introduced, and then read The Lost Book of the White. So that took me a bit of time to deal with, I have to be honest, but once I was able to get past that, I was able to continue on with reading, and just knowing that Alec and Magnus have a child, and their child's name is Max. Now, one night, the pair are disturbed by Max crying out, and they rush to his room only to find Shin Yun and Ragnar Fel there. Thinking only of their child, the pair do everything they can to protect him, but that's when Shin Yun stabs Magnus with a Svethenthorn, which is a magical weapon, and they steal the powerful Book of the White. Mercifully, Max is okay, but who knows what Shin Yun and Ragnar Fel want with the Book of the White, and what will happen now that Magnus has been stabbed with the Svethenthorn. It's time to call the cast of Shadowhunters from the Institute of New York to get the book back and work out what's happening with Magnus before it's too late. So to my thoughts on this book, and I experienced an overwhelming sense of whiplash at the beginning. To this point, I've read all the Mortal Instruments books and most of Infernal Devices and book 1 in The Eldest Curses, and can now see why this book is left mostly till last. So as I said, at the end of book 1, Alec and Magnus don't have a child, so it was very weird for me to come to terms with this and get over not having met Max when Magnus and Alec did. In saying that, once I was on board with it, I enjoyed the book a whole lot more. We actually visit hell in this book, and I love seeing fantasy writers' interpretations of heaven and hell in books, and so too loved it in this one. It was also nice having the other New York Shadowhunters back, especially knowing that they were the side characters this time. All in all, it was a good way to end the duology so far. As I said earlier, there are rumours Claire will do a 3rd book, and I'll be up for it if and when she does, but for now it was a satisfying ending, and as I said, I gave this book 4 stars. So those are the 3 books that I read this week. Now let's look forward to see what books I plan to read in the week to come. Okay, so looking forward to see what I plan to read in this upcoming week. First book I plan to read is this book, The Final Winter by Ian Rob Wright. For some reason I'm calling this book The Final Winter, but there is no the, so just Final Winter by Ian Rob Wright. This is an adult horror, and this book is going to help me to cross off the Damien verse quartet from my SAS list. I have read book 1, Sam, book 2, Asbo, and I read this year, and I read book 4, The Housemates, last year. So this is book 3, Final Winter, and as I say, will help me to cross that series off my SAS list. It is an adult horror quartet, and Ian Rob Wright, praise his name. If you want a really, really, really good horror series, I highly recommend this one. Stephen King, he's a great writer. Everyone who knows Stephen King knows how much he's celebrated in the horror world, but a lot of the horrors I read from King just don't work for me. When I read a horror, it needs to gross me out, creep me out, freak me out, make me want to leave the light on or convince me I'm going to have a nightmare. And a lot of Stephen King's books don't do that for me, but Ian Rob Wright's books definitely do that for me. So if you're someone like me, then pick up an Ian Rob Wright book, at least one in this series. You will not be disappointed. If you want full-on horror, pick up The Housemates. If you want an introduction to Ian Rob Wright, but not too much horror, then I would actually recommend Sam. Yeah, to pick up, because that one was less horrific. Not to say it wasn't horrific, but it was less horrific than the others. Okay, so after Final Winter, I plan to pick up Pulp Friction by Julie Ann Lindsay. This is book number 2 in the Cider Shop Mystery series, and it is an adult cozy mystery, so this will help me to continue on with that series. There are 3 books in that series, so once I'm done with that one, I will only have 1 more and then can cross that off my SAS list. And then after that book, I plan to pick up this book, Pros and Cons by Amanda Flower. This is book number 2 in the Magical Bookshop Mystery series, of which there are 5 books. I plan to get through that one as well this year, that series. There are 5. Yeah, I've already said that. So that's book 2, Pros and Cons, out of 5. And so there you go. So those are the 3 books I plan to read in the next week. I was originally planning on reading The First to Die at the End, but I have saved that to my Scribd account, and unfortunately Scribd now seem to think that it's funny to place a limitation on me. I haven't been experiencing limitations with Scribd before, so it's kind of weird to have that now, but I will not have The First to Die at the End available for me until the 16th, and so yeah, it's all to do with the billing cycle. Apparently there are limitations on Scribd. Some of you experienced them before, some of you haven't. This is the first time I am. But also Pros and Cons I've been restricted with as well, so I'm going to go over to Audible and read Pros and Cons that way. But in case you're wondering what's going on with The First to Die at the End, I'll be reading that in the following week. So once again, just to confirm, in the upcoming week, I plan to read Final Winter by Ian Rob Wright, Pulp Friction by Julie Ann Lindsay, and Pros and Cons by Amanda Flower. But that is it. That is where I'm going to leave it for this week. How did your reading go in this particular week? Did you have a lot of fun? Any great books? Any DNFs? Let me know in the comment section below. But in the meantime, that is where I am going to leave it, letting you all go with peace, blessings, and so much love. Please do be kind and love one another and spread your sparkling energy all throughout the world. And until next time, happy reading. Bye everyone.